the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
Where he's like, he really just doesn't really care about the seeding, and he's just like, if we're healthy, we can beat anybody, and as long as we get in there, then let's just see what happens.
I think that there's more of an element of the latter, but you are bringing up an interesting dynamic within the Lakers of building around a 39-year-old who's in year 21. And there have been stretches during the season where LeBron James has not played, let's say, the best defense. And part of that has been because he's a 39-year-old who has played the most minutes in NBA history, and asking that guy to be a 35 to 38 minute a night guy and carry the offense at times, carry the offense in the fourth quarter in crunch time, and play locked in defense during that entire stretch that he's on the floor. Like, that's a lot to ask of a guy who was dealing with an ankle injury last season that has now lingered into this season. He's been listed as questionable basically every game this year, and he's played more often than not, and I think exceeded expectations from a games played overall standpoint. But he has been managing this left ankle injury, and it's basically a degenerative tendon, or tendonitis in his left ankle. So like, I think that's one of the challenges of building a roster around him, is you're trying to complement his strengths and sort of filling in the gaps and the holes around him, but you also have to factor in, like, you can't really have defensive liabilities out there. And that's where at times, like when D'Angelo Russell is at his worst, which I thought he was in that Golden State game, of being lackadaisical defensively, not really having any urgency, taking bad shots, and just being inefficient. Like, that's where I think that there's a trickle-down effect. And you've seen it at times with different role players being out. They've had to rely on more offensive-minded guys, and then the defense has just completely collapsed. So I think it's just more of an interesting like thing within like how the Lakers build out the roster for next season and the season after that. Like, I think they have to lean more into size and defense and athleticism, and really try to support LeBron and AD in that way. Because for parts of the season, I just think they were too small. They weren't good enough defensively, and they just didn't have that requisite level of physicality that you need against the very best teams. So, but like the urgency thing was definitely there in December and January. Like, I had a report with Shams Charania in early January when they lost 4 in a row about a deepening disconnect within the locker room. And a big part of it was the Lakers ran it back with the group that made the conference finals, but then that group was barely playing together. And they started the season, Taurean Prince, Austin Reeves, and D'Angelo Russell, and they get off to a slow start. They start 3-5. That lineup isn't working, and they end up benching Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell before they benched Taurean Prince. It took them 50 games to bench Taurean Prince, and he was brought in as a guy on a biannual exception, making $4.5 million, and he was playing over Jared Vanderbilt, who the team just signed to a 4-year extension, and Rui Hachimura, who was one of the breakout guys in the playoffs, and they signed to a 3-year, $51 million contract over the summer. So it was like kind of this cognitive dissonance of the team's investing in these younger, higher upside guys who help them go on a Western Conference Finals run. And yet the coaching staff is prioritizing minimum guys and guys who are barely hanging on in the league, in like a Cam Reddish, over more established guys and just better basketball players. And it took them 50-ish games to finally start Rui Hachimura and find this lineup that has now had a lot of success. But had they done that game 20, game 30, or even game 1, I think we're talking about a team that's right there with like the Clippers and the Mavericks, and competing for like seeds 4, 5, 6, rather than potentially a 10 seed.
So you think if the sample size was significantly larger, you don't think there'd be diminishing returns there? You think it would have played out?
I think there'd be on some level, of course, like, because their win pace with Rui Hachimura, like the starting lineup of AD, LeBron, Rui, Austin, D'Lo, they've won at like a 55, 56 win pace. I'm not saying that would be the same case, but would they be 48 to 50 wins? I think that's a bit more realistic. And in the West right now, with how tight this race is, like even, looking at like add 3 more wins to the Lakers ledger and they vault up to the 6th seed. Yeah. And again, like right there with the Mavericks, like right behind them. So I think even with like the same injuries, right? Because again, Vando is a very important part of this roster. He's been out for over half the season. Gabe Vincent was out, and those were two of their better defensive players, two of the guys supposed to prop up the defense. And despite that, they've still found ways to be competitive on that end. But to me, even with the same injuries, if you just restarted the season and had Rui Hachimura in place of Taurean Prince, because there was games like if you go back and look at some of the November, December box scores, there are games where Taurean Prince is playing 35 minutes and Rui Hachimura is playing 18. And like, that's just because it's not, because some people will say, oh, the starting lineup, like doesn't matter who starts, but like it matters when the coach is playing these starters way more minutes than the bench. And it's not like Taurean was this token starter just coming in and playing like 20 minutes. He was playing, I mean, he was leading the team in minutes for stretches of the season or top 3 for stretches of the season. And like, that's just, he's not qualified to be a starting small forward on like a contender or a team that wants to be a contender. So I think that's been one of the, like, and he's last on the team in plus minus. And that's another factor here of just like, they have really lost and struggled in the Taurean minutes. And he's been better now off the bench in like a 15 to 18 minute role, but it should not have taken till game 51 or whatever it was to determine that. Like the lineup data was conclusive. The eye test was conclusive. Players were hinting at it in the locker room, and yet it just never really happened. So I think that's basically what was the theme of my story last night and my post-game reaction video of just like, these are the losses that they had in December and January as they were doing these like odd experiments with the rotation and with lineups, playing these lineups that didn't really make sense. And they really struggled during that stretch. And like, that's the stretch that's now coming back to haunt them, because now you can't afford LeBron to get the flu or AD to get poked in the eye. Like, you lost that margin for error months ago, and now you need those guys. And the fact that you just lost them, like, it might cost you the season now.
And then you look at it, I mean, do you think they get out of the play-in? Like, does this Lakers team feel like because of the hole that they dug, do you even think they end up in the playoffs based on the matchups that they're looking at here?
I think it really depends on the path, because there's still a shot that, so, you know, again, as of tomorrow, they will likely be 10. But if Golden State loses and the Lakers went out, they pass them. Sacramento, New Orleans, Phoenix, they all have some tough games coming up. They all, New Orleans and Sacramento still play each other. So that's a factor in terms of dropping one of those teams. So there's still a path for the Lakers to get to probably like 8th is their ceiling realistically. But that is a big difference between being number 8 and being number 9 in terms of having 2 shots to advance versus single elimination in the 9-10 game. So to me, it's going to come down to, like, if they're 10, it's still possible that they make it. But I think, like, if they can draw Sacramento in one of the 2 games, I think that, like, I think everyone wants to play Sacramento right now with no Monk, no Kevin Huerter. Like, those are 2 big blows for them, and just a loss of offensive firepower, loss of shooting, spacing. Like, those are 2 big offensive pieces for the Kings. They've been in a rut lately. They've blown several big leads. They blew a big lead to New York. They just blew a big lead to Oklahoma City. So, like, I think people or teams in the West right now are looking at the Kings as like food, as like, let's get the Kings and you know, we'll at least win that game, and then we can worry about the other game. But I really think it depends who they draw. If it's 9-10 Golden State, it's going to be tough to go into Golden State and win that game. If Sacramento drops, I think if that's the 9-10, I think they would beat Sacramento. But then again, now you're looking at Golden State, Phoenix, or New Orleans. Like, I think they beat New Orleans, but I do have some pause with Golden State and Phoenix. Those are the 2 I look at of. So I guess if you're asking me, like, I would put it at 50-50 odds, depending on the seeding.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.